right, now we're ready for Susan. Susan currently leads the Global Enterprise Social Strategy and Programs for IBM. She consults with marketers globally about applying social and digital media to foster long-term, high-value relationships with clients, prospects, partners, colleagues, and communities. She's the author of one of the best books this year, The Most Powerful Brand on Earth, How to Transform Teams, Empower Employees, Integrate Partners, and Mobilize Customers to Beat the Competition in Digital and Social Media. I highly recommend that you check it out, and there is a 30% off coupon in your folder. I'm honored to consider her one of my best friends in the digital world. Susan.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And most of all, thank you for Greg for having us. And I was kind of joking with him last night that it's no longer 6 degrees separation from Kevin Bacon. It's 1 degree separation from Greg Gurrick, don't you think? Because he brought us all together here. It's pretty amazing. So thanks for having us. I really wanted to start with a big idea during this time today. And you heard a lot from Brian earlier around customers and the customer experience driven by emotion and connectivity of what they care about. And what I'm going to share with you today is a very different way of looking at marketing as we know it. And especially in our roles as digital marketers or social media marketers, oftentimes we forget that customers are at the heart of what we do. What's important about that is the studies are showing more and more, and we started to realize this when we did our listening beginning back in 2007, our first listening pilots for IBM, was that customers trust our experts and regular employees more so than anyone else in your company. That's a really big idea. They're not looking for marketers online. So what does that mean for us as marketers? I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that. The Edelman Trust Barometer that was released just about 6 months ago, they do it every year, but it shows very specifically that the second most trusted source of information when people are seeking to make decisions online are those who are considered extremely credible, or if you think very credible, it's based on their expertise. The second most trusted person that they'd be seeking information from would be a technical expert in your company. So for a big B2B brand, especially like IBM and 3M, very much the same, we really thought a lot about how are we going to enable the power of our employees to drive connectivity, share their expertise and knowledge online. I think this is a very big change in the way we as marketers need to think about our jobs. Oftentimes we see brands focus very much on tactical implementation, branded channels, managing them as another marketing channel. You're starting to see some brands evolve, and I cover many of them in the book, to trusted expertise and helping those that possess it become visible online. And I'll tell you a story about why that matters, and I'll get to this in just a minute. But this is a big piece of research that I think everyone should read, certainly online. And the other key component here is, in addition to experts in your company, people are seeking information from people like themselves. Just like what Brian was sharing earlier, when we connect around a passion or an interest, or maybe potentially what Tim was sharing, what our kids are doing, we're seeking out others like us that are living that experience, and we could get information from, we could commiserate with, we could feel empathy from. I think Anna brought that up earlier, right? So 2 big important factors: trust in technical experts within a company and seeking out information of people like me. That's more so than your CEO or even your regular employees. And it's certainly more so when you think about advertising. And this is from a Nielsen research study that was released a couple years ago. The highest number in terms of those that are trusting information online actually isn't the advertising at all, right? That's at the bottom. Ads on my mobile comes in last. But what's on top? People I know. Consumer opinions online. I thought it was really fascinating how Tim shared implementing the whole ratings and reviews. That's a great step in the right direction because that's who people are trusting. Someone who's tried your product. They're going to be seeking out how do they feel about it? What was their experience? Another big piece of research that was done, again, thinking about the growth in terms of the way that people consume information, is that trust is rapidly increasing in social media. Because why? That's how we're consuming information. Ever so more consuming social information, whether it's from our mobile device or from the social network and a group that we share, people like me, or seeking out a trusted expert. Trust in social media has grown 75%, and that's from the Nielsen Trust advertising research. Another key point is that social media and user-generated content that we share strongly impacts organic search. This is a study from Search Metrics that was released last year, and the most influential factors in organic search are actually becoming more and more social. They're content that we share, whether it's on Facebook or on Twitter or on any other venue. It's the information, user-generated content that we actually share. So you hear about social and search convergence. That's so much more important now. So we need to be thinking about that as well. And who creates user-generated content that is going to be the most trusted? Experts in your company, your employees. Why is that? Because they're passionate about the work that they do. They are focused on bringing better products to market. They are focused on solving customer needs because they're passionate about your company and what they do for a living. It's a very different way of thinking about marketing. Another key piece of information, and I'll get through this research in just a few minutes, but I'm trying to set the stage here for an understanding of why this is so important and why it's a big change for us as marketers, is that sales and the total number of people who advocate for your brand across industries has been proven on average to drive 53% change in offline sales. And it's attributed by the number of people advocating for your brand. Not the number of likes, not the number of shares necessarily, people. And this was proven in a study that was released by MotiveQuest and Northwestern University. So when you are operating in a global brand like IBM, and 3M is another example, and so many of the other brand reps that are here are probably in the same scenario. How do you scale? How do you take a hold of that opportunity in trusted experts who are being sought after online? We ran a study last year at IBM where we worked very closely with key subject matter experts in our company to prove out this theory. And we enabled them very specifically with support from our marketing team. And I'll talk a little bit more about that support in a minute. But what was a huge sea change for us was the understanding of the results that they drove. In one quarter, we looked at the number of demand generation tactics that we were putting in the marketplace. In one quarter alone, there were over 4,000 messages that were being sent out from our demand generation center. So this is, our marketing competency center. And we compared that in terms of results or conversions to a call to action. So this would be, either mentioning an offer or potentially registering for an event or whatever it might be. We compared that with the capability of expert employees to deliver that same message, but from their authentic voice, related in the context of their expertise. And what we saw was astonishing. They drove twice the amount of initiations to our call to action. 33% compared to 14%. Why is that? Well, you think about seeking trusted information from individuals. They're in my network. They're people like me. They're trying to solve a business problem that's similar to my own. So when we realized that, and we could actually track it down to the individual and see who was able to drive those kinds of results, we realized we really need to have some kind of a support program that's going to help these individuals. Because again, as Brian was describing, the customer experience is driven through potentially your engagement online, your connectivity to people you know. And we find that true at IBM, where we're very much focused on, and the employee engagement drives the customer experience. I think that proves it out. So this is probably a very different vantage point of thinking about your social media strategy. And we approach it from a people-centric perspective, and we believe that our employees are going to be the strongest brand ambassadors of our company. There are a lot of other brands that are doing this well, and I include some examples, especially Ford is doing a great job of this, and there are plenty of others that are included in the book. But I wanted to talk about why is it that if brands understood this, why are they hesitant? Why are they hesitant to take advantage of this opportunity and equip their employees to be advocates? There's a lot of really good reasons, beginning mainly with fear, right? Concerning about damaging the brand or the reputation. Not really sure how they could control a crisis situation, not being able to be prepared for that. That's a big one. Also, regulatory concerns. So if you're in a regulated environment, this may be a very different dynamic for you. There's also this hesitance to move the model from a centralized operation of marketing and do more of a distributed approach to marketing and communications through your employees. And I think that all of us as brand marketers probably struggle with that because we've always been at the center of marketing and communications. This is a very different approach to that. Also, brands oftentimes avoid this because they don't want their employees creating brand assets that are potentially, off-brand or not considered their own or brand compliant. And also, they might just be unaware of how to begin. An interesting study by marketing profs found that 2/3 of B2B content marketers have a difficult time finding the right content or even keeping up with the content stream that they need to develop. It's like feeding the beast, right? Many of us probably know that. We live that every day. But if you think about your marketing and communications department not being able to do that alone, there's no way that you can scale that kind of beast that you need to feed, right? So your marketing team is very small, where you think about your employee set is much larger. So if you equip that employee set, you'll be able to reach more customers with those they most often seek and those that they trust. So another theory you hear a lot about is engaging the influencers. And we've been doing a great amount of study around influencers for a number of years. But I think that I'll get into this a little bit more, but there are 3 key success factors to employee and partner enablement in social media to create advocacy. One is focusing on the relationship. The second is enabling individuals as the people that they are. And the third is creating a scalable support structure. So start with focusing on relationships. I mentioned it earlier. You might be thinking about social as an approach that's very tactical, probably beginning with venues or the platforms that you should be on, where you should have a brand presence, or even technologies. That's a mistake. And where you need to be evolving your thinking is to focusing on people and relationships, focusing social strategy around the power of the individual. They can empathize, a brand can't. So here's an example of just a high-level relationship ecosystem that we began to study. It was around 2 different topics that were important to our brand. And there were discussions going on online. And so through listening and through social media analytics, we were able to uncover the ecosystem of relationships that existed around these 2 important topics, one being in this yellow color and the other being in blue. What was amazing is not only could we understand the connectivity in that social network, we could see employees who naturally emerged in that network, and they're indicated by the little red dots that you see within either the yellow or blue circle. So what does this mean? It means that we already have expert employees engaged, connected in the right ecosystem. So how do we take that starting point and equip them to be more successful, to drive business outcomes that are important to us? And that's how our journey began. Listening and analytics, data-driven understanding of relationships is what our social strategy is founded on. You also see in this graph the little yellow bubble down, I don't know which way I am, but at the bottom where it shows no connectivity whatsoever. And what's interesting about this is when we began to understand the relationship ecosystem, we could uncover gaps in our coverage model. There's a big one right there. And that particular influencer that is identified in that circle has no connectivity to this ecosystem whatsoever. So you can uncover clues on relationships and how to build them if you focus on the data and the analytics. So a lot of talk about influencer engagement these days, and many of you are probably running influencer programs at your company. But that's only one place to start. So I'm going to go on here a little bit to explain how I think influencers are only one part of solving this problem. First and foremost, the notion that past influence equals future influence is a myth, because influence is really only contextual as it relates to a topic that someone cares about. And at any given time, you may have influence or not, right? The other is 50% of product adoption is actually not driven by influence at all, but rather by homophily. And there's a great study by Sinan Oral, who's cited in the book, about homophily and how people make decisions based on others that they know, and product decisions that they make are actually more influential than any influencer in the network. They're informed by the decisions their peers make or potentially other business decision makers make that are connected to them, more so than, for example, an influencer. And then lastly, influencers may be very difficult to find. When you're doing online research and analytics, there are private communities where influencers reside as well. They can't be found through our typical analytics, research, and listing because they're gated communities. But I'll bet many of your customers your employees are part of that community, right? So if you uncover the communities that are important and the discussions that are being had around topics of interest, then you'll be able to find gateways into those private communities through your employees. So we need to look at this as more of a portfolio approach to influence. So it's not just all about the influencers. Thinking about homophily, shared interest, people like me, and using an employee diversified approach when you're focusing on engagement. So the second theory here is enabling the individual. And that is where we're focused on looking at the maturity curve of any individual that's coming into social sharing and their expertise. Beginning with, it has to be a foundation of understanding that they have a desire to engage. They have to have self-awareness or understanding on how they will provide value. In addition, always make sure that they're equipped with listening. Whether it's that you're providing it to them, you're providing that data intelligence to them so that they can be more effective and impactful with their engagement. A lot of times employees don't have access to that kind of intelligence. So equipping them with that makes a big difference. Also advancing up to a professional presence. So it's one thing to create your profile and to share who you are, but it's a whole nother thing to then advance into participation. So professional participation on behalf of a particular business need that the company is trying to solve. And then lastly, the last two tiers of this social employee maturity model include community facilitation and also community leadership. And there are only a few people in your employee set that will ever make it to that top tier. There's a big commitment in that. And when we saw that conversion rate of those digitally engaged experts, these are the types of people that can drive those 2 times conversion rates because they're committed, they understand the value, they understand how to develop relationships with people like them, talk about their expertise that customers are seeking out. And I think I'm going to have to skip ahead a little bit faster because I have just 1 minute left to cover a scalable structure. So what you would need to build in order to accomplish this would be a scalable structure of enablement. And it includes leadership. You have to have support from top-down leadership in the sense that you're focusing on a cultural transformation. Some of it is going to be grassroots. Certainly it has been for us. But we've had very much focus on leadership to ensure that our employees are recognized as our most valuable resource and that we do need to equip our workforce differently. And then you'll need to create a whole approach on how to prepare. So which relationships to focus on, which conversations are happening that would be important to be a part of. Focusing on tactical implementation. What are the digital assets you might need to make available to your employees? What are the capabilities that they're going to need? Knowledge management systems. How will they collaborate openly, internally, externally? And having an operating model that you can successfully focus on equipping them. And then lastly, measurement. So ultimately what you're driving is for your employees to be able to perform, to be in the right place with the right content, engaged with the right interactions, with those who are seeking their expertise. So I think I'm out of time, and I'm going to end it there. There's plenty more that's in the book, and I'm going to open it up for questions too, in case anyone has any. Any questions? A very different way of thinking about marketing, right?
I just have a question. How many of your employees are involved in this?
How many of our
how you
employees?
identify them and how you prepare? Do you train them? Do you give materials?
Yeah.
How's the process?
So that's a great question. And we put together a segmentation model. We have over 430,000 employees at IBM. And there's baseline components of our strategy, so everyone needs to know the engagement guidelines, the secure computing guidelines if you're going to participate, how to present yourself as a professional, et cetera. So that's kind of the baseline. But also then we looked at our whole entire workforce and we said we need to have some kind of an online model that can be on demand, accessible to anyone globally at any time. So we developed an online training course. We call it the Digital IBMer Hub. And it doesn't only teach, platforms and things like that. It has that too, but more importantly, what it has is how to create your presence, how to engage with customers, how to listen, how to interact and provide value. So the behaviors you want to incent rather than just platforms or technologies, right? And then the next level up, we looked at if we wanted to have a certain grouping of experts be active, who might they be? Well, they would be those that are aligned to our key priorities in our business. So we began to prioritize by expertise that we wanted to expose in the marketplace. And those employees that held that expertise were going to be a certain set of segment that we were going to mobilize. And then at the very top, we have a different enablement model that's more high value, one-on-one coaching for those that will potentially become influencers in that set. So I cover that all too, and there's more information. But hopefully that answers your question, yeah. Okay. Yeah.
So we're in a very complicated organization in terms of business models and multiple regulation inputs and so on. And so my question for you is, in IBM's case, do you feel that the business environment was homogeneous enough that these onboarding guidelines that you have were pretty easy to standardize and apply across the different, I guess, segments of offerings you may have? Or did you find that there was a lot of business model specific sort of variation to struggle with as far as how guidelines might apply differently to different groups?
That's a great question. So I'm going to start with guidelines, and I would just say that we formulated our guidelines in 2005, the very first set of guidelines. And how we did that was, again, we went out to employees that we saw were active and committed to building their own presence, and we asked for their input. They actually helped us write our first set of blogging guidelines in 2005. Those have evolved over time. And the reason that has evolved so well is because we're asking our employees to help. We're empowering them to give us their feedback on how those standards and guidelines need to change. Because this is a really fast-paced, moving environment. So we've updated those guidelines many times, but it's all based on employee input. Any other questions? Yeah.
So one question, you mentioned that you're very strategic about which types of profiles you were going after. Were you also strategic around the platforms and or forums in which the employees could participate?
And then if a real example of that. So in our early days of research, I would say back in 2008, one of the things we were studying very specifically, I like to use this example, was mainframe computers and the cloud. And our focus imperative was growing private workloads on installed customers that had the mainframe. because cloud was very important, imperative for us. So when we did our research, what we found was not only the network of relationships, but we also found the venues that are important to those individuals, where they participate. 75% of those venues that were important or people that were participating were on key online forums related to mainframe and a couple of user groups. They weren't on Facebook. Twitter didn't even exist at that time. But they were not on the traditional, LinkedIn, things like that. They were in a place that we needed to focus. 75% of the discussions are happening here. That's where we need to mobilize our engagement. Not that the others are not important, but through listening and social media analytics, you can tell which venues are important to your brand related to the topic in which you want to engage. Any other questions? Great. I think I've one more.
Sure. Where you're facilitating and encouraging these non-branded employee-owned channels, are you also measuring and tracking the success of those channels? And how do you do that? It just seems like it would be a huge universe to try to do.
And there's a measurement framework in the book too, so if you want to read more about it. But essentially we use a lot of data-driven intelligence to understand how our brand is faring in the market related to particular topics. In addition to that, we're looking at having a standard for both our branded channels as well as our employees, and have the same KPI framework that is unified so that we can then look at what's working better, branded channels or our people. So we've constructed a framework that includes network reach, the quality of that reach, the engagement that's actually happening from those relationships. We also look at advocacy or amplification that happens that's earned, right? So reshared from content that you share. And what's more effective in terms of converting into a call to action. We use that same KPI framework across our branded channels as well as our people. And some very interesting findings. And we're learning, we're constantly learning through the data of the adjustments we need to make. But having a consistent KPI framework really helps to uncover that. You're welcome. I got a lot of questions. I got to wrap it up, I think. I'm getting